participation and comments. The Contra Costa Transportation Authority does not condone hate speech in any form. We continually strive to make life better for all members of our community and create an atmosphere where everyone feels a sense of safety and belonging. We ask that anyone who wishes to speak does so with civility, respect, and kindness for others. Public speakers will have up to 3 minutes to speak. The chair will call upon public speakers at the appropriate time. Each public speaker is requested to state their name and organization, but providing such information is voluntary. Public speakers who wish to speak in person should submit a public speaker card to the clerk. Public speakers participating by Zoom who are wishing to speak should use the raise hand feature or dial *9 if participating via phone. Written public comments received in accordance with the teleconferencing special notice on the meeting agenda will be provided to the members. If authors of any written correspondence would like to speak during the meeting, they should raise their hand or submit a public speaker card. Thank you for participating in a meeting of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority.
Erica, can you please conduct roll call?
Member Armijo? Member Chen?
Here.
Member Kunrati?
Here.
Member Diaz? Member Doe? Member Elias?
Here.
Member Golier? Member Greenblatt? Member Levine?
Here.
Member LaBelle? Here. Member Nelson? Member Ortiz? Member Panganiban?
Here.
Member Redmond? Member Rahani? Member Smith?
Here.
Member Stamps? Member Valeros? Member Verts?
Here.
Member Polite, or Vice Chair Polite? And Chair Weeks?
Here.
We have, let's see,
We have a couple people walking in too, so
we do not yet have quorum.
yeah, looks like 9. This may give us our quorum. Welcome. Can I go ahead and move forward with public comment?
We do not have any public comment.
Okay, is there anyone wishing to speak during public comment on an item that is not part of the agenda? If so, please submit a public speaker card or raise your virtual hand, and staff or I will call upon you. Do we have any person in person or remote for public comment?
We do not have in-person or remote public comment.
Thank you. That concludes public comment item. The next item on the agenda is the election of chair and vice chair for 2025. Do we have a quorum at this time so we can move forward with this item?
We do not, we need 11 for quorum. We can,
And we're at 10? Where are
we're
we?
at 10.
Okay. Well, I'd say maybe we look at the order of the agenda and move this to the end of the agenda. Do we need to vote on that, or can we just go ahead and move forward to maintain that?
We can just move it.
Okay, great. So we'll move item 1 to the end.
Okay, we need to move consent. And so we moved election. Do you want to move consent to the after regular agenda items?
Yeah, let's do all that at this time. Anything we need to vote on? So the item 2 and 3 will be moved. May become item
Or 3 and 4?
3 and 4. And item 4 will become 2. Okay, with a nod of your head, I will move forward, shall we?
Yes.
Okay, so this brings us to the new item 2, formerly item 4, regular agenda items. We have 3 items today. The first item is informational and will be presented by Jay Zhang to provide an update on upcoming obligation deadlines. Jay?
Thank you, Chair Weeks. Good afternoon, committee members. It's been a while since we had this meeting, so hope we are all doing well. So this is an informational item on the project status in our county, federally funded. So no action is required. So first up, we have the STIP projects. As you can see, most of the projects have deadlines coming up in the next fiscal year. So far, there isn't any concern. I just want to remind everyone that if a project has been granted extension earlier, it will not be eligible to receive another extension. So if your project is on the list and you know you already got an extension, that's the last time you can receive one for that phase. And then moving on to OBAC projects. As I said in the last meeting, the county's already obligated most of our funding in fiscal year 24 and prior. So the list you see here is rather short because the OBAC cycle is coming to an end. But again, most of these projects have deadlines coming up in the next fiscal year. But I do want to remind everyone on the bottom table here in fiscal year 26, most of these projects have field reviews, NEPA approval, right-of-way certification coming up in succession. So just want to remind everyone to be aware of that. And then moving on to the active transportation program. Again, not much concern here except for one in the city of San Pablo. I believe they're going to get an extension at today's CTC commission meeting. So they're looking to extend that deadline into the next fiscal year as well. Also, congratulations to the county. They were awarded about $4.3 million in ATP funding for the next cycle. So it's a good project there on the end of the list here. And then last but not least, we have the Caltrans FHWA inactive list. We're doing quite well. We only have 2 projects on this list. So just want to remind everyone to maintain that effort to seek reimbursement from Caltrans so your funding is not at risk. And with that, I conclude my presentation. Welcome any questions.
Thank you, Jay. Are there any questions or comments from the committee at this time? Okay. So if anyone would like to speak from the public, please submit a speaker card or raise your virtual hand, and staff or I will call upon you. Erica, do we have any written in-person or remote public comments?
We do not have any public comments at this time.
Okay, thanks, Jay. Appreciate
Thank
the
you.
presentation. The next item is an action item and will be presented by Matt Kelly regarding the State Route 4 vision study.
So sorry, hi Chair.
Hi.
So as we don't have a quorum yet, would you be okay with moving Matt's SR4 item to after the ITP?
Is that not an action item?
It is not.
It's informational. Okay, let's move Matt's item to C on the agenda and move C to B.
Thank you.
Yay, quorum. We don't want to make them rush. So what should we just go ahead and do the move, or what do you want to do, Matt? You want to go?
I'm here.
Okay, so back to the original order. Thank you, Matt.
Give me one moment to load my PowerPoint. All right, good afternoon, TCC. Thank you, Chair, for the introduction. Matt Kelly, Principal Transportation Planner with the Authority, here to present the State Route 4 Corridor Vision Study. Most of you have seen this presentation at the RTPCs where we were last month for this item. We went to at least 3 of the 4 RTPCs. Southwest, we left you out because you do not touch Highway 4 or come anywhere close to it. So we took this item to the 3 RTPCs that deal with Highway 4, West County, Central County, and East County. So I'm going to provide kind of a summarized version of the report for you all today. So the reason why we started this project, it wasn't to create a singular vision for all of Highway 4. As you know, it travels through very different environments and geographies, and a cohesive vision for the entire corridor would not be possible. So really what we were trying to do is take existing projects, existing plans, studies that have been ongoing over the last several years, stitch those together and come up with a plan for the corridor in terms of how we could fund some of these projects and really how we can fund them through SB1. So that was one of the main goals of this, and I'll get into that in just a minute. So like I said, we wanted to draw from existing plans. We weren't trying to make up a new plan or study. We were really trying to stitch existing efforts together. So some of you may have remembered several years ago, we were working on an ICM, Integrated Corridor Mobility Project for Highway 4. We used to meet in this room. ICM was kind of the operational, strategy of the day 10 or so years ago. It was first deployed on Interstate 80 as the I-80 Smart Corridor. It got panned by some, others think it, thought it was providing some benefit to the corridor. So when, we started looking at I-80, we said, hey, maybe we should approach SR4 slightly different, learning some lessons from what happened on the ICM corridor over in West County. So we had put that on hold in about 2018. And then we started on these other efforts, the State Route 4 Design Alternatives Assessment. That was an MTC-led effort to look at converting HOV to express lane in East Contra Costa County, as well as potential of adding a second HOV lane out there. There was the East County Integrated Transit Study, a CCTA-led project that looked at extending high-capacity transit beyond the Antioch BART station to the Brentwood Intermodal Center. We also have been looking at a project on Highway 4 between Port Chicago Highway and Bailey Road that is called the SR4 Operational Improvements Project. It's focused on the congestion over Willow Pass and addressing that through mostly operational improvements, we'll call them. There's the SR4 I-680 interchange project, which was a major component of Measure J, but has been woefully short of funding for the remaining phases. SR 239 study, which is really focused on an initial component known as the airport connector or the Byron Vasco connector, that it kind of continues on from Highway 4 in Far East County in the Byron area. And then the Hercules Hub project, which is in West County and is focused on building a rail station and other improvements along the waterfront. The scope that we came up with is based on Caltrans's CMCP requirements. CMCP is Comprehensive Multimodal Corridor Plan. Basically, for CCTA to be able to apply for SB1 funds under the Solution for Congested Corridors grant program, which is what we'd like to apply for SR4 I-680 interchange, as well as potentially the SR4 operational improvements. you can't compete for those funds unless you have a CMCP in place. Generally, Caltrans leads the CMCP project. You may remember last year, they led a project or a CMCP effort on I-680 to support the northbound express lane project. So we were a little lower, SR4 was a little lower on their priority list. So we approached them and said, hey, if we were to prepare this study that we were already thinking about doing, could it qualify as a CMCP and therefore make us eligible for solutions for congested corridors? And they said, well, you know, it needs to be multimodal. We were already going that direction. So they said, as long as you include these 6 topic areas that you see listed on your screen, that and you know, kind of followed their basic CMCP guidelines, that this could qualify. So we've been working with, we got their assurance that it would, and then we've been working with staff throughout the process. So here's everyone who is involved, just about, you know, everybody in the northern part of the county, including those three RTPCs I mentioned. We developed a corridor vision, the TAC that was that guided this effort, and you know, I'm not going to read this. It's a bit of a word salad. Everybody got their point in here, but really, it's about you know, expanding the modes used in the corridor. You know. Transitioning, hopefully, people out of their single occupant vehicle into other modes, enhancing those first last mile connections, you know, promoting sustainability, economic vitality, and reliability. So the benefits of the corridor vision, you know, in terms of equity and equitable access, this would provide a lot of investments in disadvantaged communities, which there are many of along the corridor, and it would incorporate solutions that have already been identified in a lot of these communities through previously completed efforts, including our own community-based transportation plans. Congestion reduction, so, you know, a lot of the projects in here focus on moving people out of their single occupant vehicles, including VMT reduction strategies. Those are mostly transit and TDM based. Big focus was system reliability, the ability to increase total corridor throughput, not just cars, but goods and people in whatever mode they're in, and to support those non-capital strategies, those operational improvements that where we're not expanding the capacity of the freeway, because we know that's very difficult these days, post SB 743. And then sustainability, you know, the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the corridor. And on the land use side, providing good access to the sites along the corridor that have already been identified by the local jurisdictions for, you know, high density development, and in some cases they've already started that. So achieving the corridor vision, in order to improve modal diversity, you really need to focus on reliability, and not just reliability for autos, but for transit. Folks are much more likely to embrace transit if they know the bus will come to their stop at the same time every day and get them to their destination at about the same time every day. And then supportive bike and pedestrian infrastructure, and not just, you know, sharrows, but high quality infrastructure. You're not really going to achieve mode, you know, people changing modes unless you put in high quality infrastructure. Looking at the first last mile connectivity, you know, on Highway 4, especially out in East County, you know, you've got BART, but how do you get to BART? How do you get from BART to your destination? And that first last mile may be, you know, 3 miles or 5 miles in some places in the corridor. And then pursuing our mobility hubs development. CCTA has a countywide plan for Mobility Hub development, part of our ITP, which you'll be hearing about shortly. And so we think that's a really important component of that first last mile approach and providing options there. Improving efficiency along the corridor by tolling through express lanes and employing new and emerging technology solutions. And a lot of those are, ramp metering, timing, signal timing, things like that that can, improve flow for traffic, transit, and improve safety for vulnerable users. And then as far as safety goes, I mentioned those higher quality bike and pedestrian facilities to really affect safety and those collision hotspots that we identified in the corridor. So the elements of the study were, as I mentioned earlier, to build upon those existing efforts, to document plans that were already out there, not old plans, but plans within the last 5 years or so. We did an additional analysis of a couple of items that I'll get into in just a minute to make sure we weren't missing anything. And then through the TAC, we established evaluation criteria. We did project screening based on that criteria. And then the next step is to finalize the plan and get CMCP approval from Caltrans, and then leverage the plan to pursue project funding and implementation, both through SB1 and other grant funding programs. So when we started this project, we asked several groups for their input on the scope and if we were, missing anything. We came to this group. Maybe I think we came to this group. Maybe not. Anyway, we came to the CAC and the RTPCs as well as the PC and board for their input. What we heard is that we should be including Ignacio Valley, Crooker Pass corridor in our analysis because of the, the number of people that use it as a diversion between Highway 4 and 680. We understand why we heard that. Our response is that we think that corridor deserves its own study, as a transit corridor, as a cut-through corridor, and that really trying to incorporate it into this that isn't, looking at anything new was just not the right venue. So we're as through the countywide plan, we're going to identify some corridors for further study, and that should be one of them. We heard from bike advocates, one in particular that you may know, to improve connections between basically East and West County over Willow Pass. As you know, that is a section where folks have to ride on the freeway to get between the two parts of the county. So we did look at that as well. We were asked to confirm that we were assuming full build out of the Concord Naval Weapons Station in our analysis. We do have that in our model, so that was taken care of. And then we were asked to consider strategies for improving PCI throughout the corridor. Just a little on outreach. We attended several events within the corridor and asked folks specifically for their opinions on Highway 4. We also had a public survey that was on our website. We received, over 1,000, close to 2,000 responses overall between the public events and the survey. Most what we heard was that we should be looking at traffic bottlenecks. We know that Willow Pass area is affecting a lot of people on a daily basis. To be looking at roadway maintenance and repair and how, projects could support that. And then safety was something we heard from a lot of people regarding all modes. Those further analyses I mentioned, we looked at safety. We did a core, analysis of the collision hotspots. And one takeaway statistic we found was that 34% of all pedestrian collisions in the corridor resulted in KSIs, killed or serious injuries, which is a really high rate and mostly attributed to high speeds. So, looking at addressing speeds, we think is really important. We may not be able to do that through this effort, but I think through the countywide plan, that's where we're going to try and focus on speed reduction in local communities. We looked at freight. Some people were concerned that freight is an issue on Highway 4, and in maybe small areas we found it is, but we did a very thorough streetlight analysis. May have been done by someone in this room on this committee. What we found is that, you know, while it may be used as a cut-through corridor when, say, Altamont Pass 580 is congested, they may come up Byron Highway. Really, freight is using Highway 4 as, you know, maybe to get from I-80 over to 680 from the warehousing area in West County, Richmond, or the ports over there to 680, or vice versa, from the warehousing areas in North Concord over to 80. So it's really not a through freight corridor. Caltrans doesn't consider it to be one, nor do the feds. So we kind of kept our freight analysis at that point. We did an arterial operations analysis to see where arterials were being affected by Highway 4, you know, performance and congestion. Those segments are there on the slide in dark colors, and they're generally in East County between 242 and Lone Tree Way, where there is lots of congestion. We looked at emerging technologies and if there were any technologies out there that we should be considering, and most of them were ones that had been already deployed by Caltrans or the local municipalities, and generally, as I mentioned earlier, new ramp metering configurations and signal timing. So we went through 79 existing documents. We extracted 87 individual projects for scoring and review by the TAC. We applied goal-based scoring criteria to all the projects. You can see that criteria on your right. And note that safety, mobility, and social equity had additional weighting than the other criteria. Based on that scoring, we created 3 tiers of prioritized projects based on their score, and we used the Tier 1 projects to create bundles of complementary and supportive projects, and I'll get into that in just a second. These are the Tier 1 projects that all scored very well. These are the projects we used as the foundation of the bundles. And we did pull some Tier 2 projects into the bundles where we needed, where there were some gaps in different modes, or we thought there were opportunities to improve the bundles by adding some Tier 2 projects. So, as I mentioned, we used 36 projects, primarily Tier 1 projects, to create 8 bundles. The bundles were focused on kind of either a major project like the 684 interchange or the Hercules Hub, or an issue area like around, congestion in East County, or pedestrian issues, or pedestrian access to BART stations in East County, things like that, and then created supportive projects that would address the issue area or support the major project. In addition to those smaller projects kind of supporting the bigger project and adding, access for more modes to the corridor and across the corridor, we think these suites of projects or these bundles could also serve as VMT mitigation strategies or packages. So for like the operational improvement project on Highway 4, that is a VMT increasing project, and we think the suite of supporting projects could really serve as a VMT mitigation program for that. So we're hoping that we've kind of identified some of those in advance of the environmental phase of those projects. We identified 2024 capital costs. We identified potential funding programs for each project. And one of the comments we heard was to add each subregion's STMP, or Subregional Transportation Mitigation Program, as a potential funding source, because you guys are actively using that to fund some of these projects. And then we created a fact sheet for each bundle. The one on your screen is the Hercules Hub. The hub is on the waterfront, where we're working with the city to build a rail station, potentially a ferry landing and bus turnaround and all kinds of other improvements. It's kind of isolated on the west side of I-80. We identified a suite of projects that would really provide access to the waterfront from the east side, the more established side of Hercules, because you have I-80, the BNSF Railroad, and two arterials crossing under the highway at the same portion, and no good pedestrian or bicycle connections there, and providing some improvements to some ramps there that would improve access for buses accessing both the transit center and the Hercules Hub. So here's a map of all of the bundles. There's two not listed that are also on here. One is the Smart Signals program and the Smart Signals locations within the corridor, and the shared mobility hubs, those that have been identified in the State Route 4 corridor are included as a bundle as well. So the next steps are, well, we're in the middle of the first step, presenting to the RTPCs and CCTA committees. We'll be taking it to the board next month. And really our board is just forwarding this document, blessing this document and forwarding it to Caltrans so they can approve it as a CMCP. And once that happens, hopefully by September, we can start working with our partner agencies to try and track down funding, gain funding for the projects, and ultimately build the projects. And you know, one of the first steps would be applying for those SCCP funds that basically CMCP gives us a hunting license to go after. So that is my presentation today. I'd be happy to take any input you guys might have.
Thank you, Matt. Are there any comments from the committee at this time? Member Carnardi.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Under the safety goal, is there anything, any projects that try to reduce the number of wildlife collisions on the corridor?
That is not a project that is ever, that I'm aware of, that's been identified anywhere in the county. I just drove over under the one on Highway 101 in Southern California, so it is, I sometimes think, is there an opportunity for something like that in the county? We would probably rely on Caltrans to identify that, and they have identified others in the Bay Area, but no one's come to us with a project. But I would think East County or, you know, kind of Franklin Canyon area would be appropriate for that. But I'd be happy to add it if we had a sponsor.
Any other comments from the committee at this time? Member Greenblatt.
Hi, thank you, Matt. First off, I want to start off by saying I really appreciate the full analysis and the documentation that's in our packet. That brings a lot of helpful background information. I have one question that kind of builds off of Member Conradi's about safety. And, you know, we're giving 20% weight on our scores, I guess, to safety. And, you know, you mentioned that there's a lot of KSIs in the area. And I've wanted to understand why we're at 20% when some of the other factors that are analyzed are also at 20%, and if it would make sense to modify that and maybe acknowledge that, you know, we have this KSI problem and we should bump it up. And before you respond to that, my other comment just has to do with a general formatting for the tables and such. I think it's going to be a very helpful document for the 3 RTPCs. I would find it helpful, and maybe other staff people as well, is if we could either color code or somehow add columns, if we can't color code, which RTPCs these, the projects are in, but even beyond the projects when you're doing the analysis. I think that'll just help us individually if we have different priorities for moving things forward to help us identify those. So.
By RTPC?
Yeah.
Okay.
As much as you can, and I know some don't lend itself as easily, so maybe you could add a column or something, but sometimes I'm less interested in what's going on in East County than West County, and so to quickly find that information out would be helpful. Thanks. And then do you want to respond to my first comment?
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, the weighting. So, I mean, we did vet that pretty heavily through our TAC. I guess the best way to summarize it is that, you know, they did want to address safety in the criteria, and that's why they bumped it up to 20, but they didn't, I think they also felt the same way about, you know, the other issues that were weighted higher. So, yeah, there wasn't, I don't remember any discussions about it going higher than 20. We can acknowledge that safety should be a driving factor behind implementation of a lot of these projects. But at this point, I think going back and rescoring everything would be pretty tough.
I get that. I would like to see the acknowledgement, because especially on the highway, right, those collisions, any type of collisions are going to have a much more serious impact to the passengers, the drivers, or whoever's getting hit, or animals. So.
Understood, yeah.
Member Wertz.
Member Greenblatt, is there a specific other one of the categories like mobility, economic vitality, or social equity that you are specifically proposing to weight less so that we can weight safety more? And if so, by what percentage?
Remind me what page that is.
I can share the slide.
53 of the document, or okay, I'm almost there. Okay. I don't want to have a stepchild. I don't know, maybe efficient land use, efficiency in technology. I mean, it just seems, I mean, I view safety as pretty critical, and one of our number one, you know, actions that we should be taking. So I guess I'd throw efficient land use and efficiency in technology under the tires. No, not just lowering the points on one of those. And, you know, I'm perfectly happy to entertain other options for goal weighting, but.
Matt, can you remind us more concretely what efficient land use, or specifically efficiency and technology, refer to in this context?
Efficiency and technology is, you know, making better use of the system, so higher throughput of goods and people through the corridor, and using technology to do that, or in general, to improve the corridor. Whether that's, like I said, ramp metering, whether that's smart signals that are providing, you know, benefits for vulnerable users.
Would that include the AVN
ATN?
or ATM?
Yes.
Member Armijo.
Just a thought, the efficient land use, the proponent projects would probably ensure that. I wonder if that can be reduced down to 5%, and then the 5% that was sacrificed, given over to safety.
Well, Matt, do you want to say again, you hinted that rescoring this would be, and then you laughed a little bit. Can you tell us more about whether rescoring is something that we're actually considering at this time, or what is?
Yep. Staff is not considering rescoring at this time. We have expended all budget on this, and we need to get it to Caltrans if we want to qualify for potential future funding. I'm willing to make any sort of acknowledgements that, as Member Greenblatt proposed earlier, but I think rescoring 87 projects and then taking that back to the TAC and then taking it through all these bodies would really be a disservice to the project to this point.
I can accept that. But I would like to have some acknowledgement in there about the importance of safety and the high speeds and the impacts on collisions in the corridor.
That I can do for you.
And maybe in the future, we'll remember this, and when it comes before us again, we can remember to make safety higher.
Definitely.
Okay, thank you. Any other members have any comments at this time on the document or the study? Member Smith.
Yeah, I just want to, what's the ask of us here, I guess?
You know, it's mainly for your kind of final input on this study before we submit it to Caltrans. But our ask of our board is to approve and submit to Caltrans. We're looking for your, approval as well.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I'm representing SWAT, the only RTPC that wasn't included in the discussion. So I understand why, it makes a lot of sense. But I just want to mention one thing. I second the comments about bicycle access. I'm a resident of Pleasant Hill also, and our bicycle advocate of the year last year said some great things that I think should be acknowledged in the report. I also noticed that there wasn't any mention of the other side of Highway 4 between Hercules and like Martinez, bicycle access through that corridor, through San Pablo Dam Road and Alhambra Valley, parallel routes for cyclists that are trying to get on the same routes. So maybe just something related to giving cyclists continuous route, parallel routes, so that they can get the same places that motorists are trying to get by using Highway 4. Thanks. Member Stamps.
Thank you. Just a general process question, and thanks for the presentation, Matt. I feel like since SB1 was enacted, we've done this exercise maybe once or twice. We've had comprehensive corridor studies for Highway 4. I think it may be one or two. Maybe this is the second or third one. I guess I'm just wondering, so for the previous iteration of this study, the comprehensive corridor analysis, does the scope for this analysis include an exercise of going over the previous study to see what's been done? Okay, so we're checking off what's been done already, what's effective, and all right. I was just curious because I think it would help, with where we decide to invest in the future, and if where before the comprehensive corridor study was very, throughput heavy, ramp metering heavy, and it seems like our priorities are shifting more towards safety. That would give us a good gauge about, what we would want to prioritize in the next version of the study. So I'm glad it's a part of the study, and thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the committee at this time? Okay. Going. Oh, sorry, I can't read your name. Member Chen, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just gonna motion to recommend this to be forwarded for the authority board to approve.
Okay, do we need to get public comment first before we do a vote?
We do not have any public comment at this time.
Okay, well, if there's any member of the public that'd like to submit something, there's blue cards in the front of the room. Doesn't look like anybody's making any moves. Okay, so it looks like we have a motion from Member Chen. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, second by Member Armijo. Erica, please conduct a roll call vote.
Member Armijo?
Yes.
Member Chen?
Yes.
Member Conradi?
Yes.
Member Elias?
Yes.
Member Greenblatt?
Yes.
Member LaBeau?
Yes.
Member Levine?
Yes.
Member Panganiban? Member Smith?
Yes.
Member Stamps?
Yes.
Member Mertz?
Yes.
Chair Weeks?
Yes.
Passes with members Diaz, Doe, Golier, Nelson, Ortiz, Redmond, Rahani, Valeros, and Vice Chair Pillai absent.
Okay, thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
That's a great presentation. That moves us to the next item on the agenda, item C. Next item is informational and will be presented by Danielle Elkins to seek input on the action plan and integrated transit plan policy recommendations.
Hi, everybody. Danielle Elkins, Deputy Executive Director for Planning, Programs, and Policy at CCTA, here to bring back the Integrated Transit Plan. We're going to talk a little bit. I'm going to let Kate do a kickoff, explain what we've done so far, but I also will then come back and share a little bit more about what we've done in engagement since this has last come to you. Significant meetings with our transit general managers as well as the RTPCs. We're hoping to give you an update on where we're at with the plan and get your feedback. Okay, great. Thank you. Oh. I think so. Yeah. Okay. All right. So it's been a little while since we talked to all of you, so we'll recap just some study context and background, and then talk a little bit more about our transit priority corridor and access improvement zone recommendations and next steps for the study. Okay, great. So just an overview of the study. The Integrated Transit Plan is CCTA's Transit First vision that provides a vision for a robust transit network that connects all major activity centers in the county and regional hubs. And the focus of the study is on coordination among transit services in the county, as well as innovation and equity. And we have spent a good bit of time making sure that this is coordinated with sub-regional plans, with also regional plans and MTC's efforts for Plan Bay Area 2050 and their ongoing region-wide transit initiatives. And we're also considering Alameda County, countywide transit plans, and numerous other plans as well. So this gives you an idea of where we are in the study timeline. So we've completed the market assessment and review of existing plans, and we've developed our action plan recommendations, which we're going to share with you here today. We're also working on policy recommendations that would complement the action plan, and we'll be able to bring those back in a subsequent presentation. And we're also currently developing cost estimates and evaluation framework so that we can also bring back to this group the results of that analysis as to which recommendations and plans would be most effective. And so this is just to give you all a visual of which transit operators serve which parts of the county. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, but just to sort of get us all on the same page, there's obviously some overlap, but this is, just a high level where different transit operators serve throughout the county. And then moving into the action plan recommendations, we are recommending services sort of in two buckets. So we're visualizing this as a core transit network that is comprised of services that connect key destinations across the county, and those include rail services such as BART and Amtrak, the transit priority corridors that we are going to recommend as part of this study, and then frequent bus corridors as well. And so the difference between transit priority corridors and frequent bus corridors is that transit priority corridors are conceived of as having potentially infrastructure improvements like bus lanes and transit signal priority, more enhanced stops and stations, and frequent bus routes would have higher frequency and be part of a network where you could sort of show up without having to think about the schedule in too much depth, but doesn't have those other infrastructure elements. And so I guess maybe just also worth saying that this study doesn't contemplate any recommendations that would change the Amtrak or BART services. Those are taken as sort of background, but conceived of as part of the county's core transit network. And so then connecting folks to the core transit network.
Sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
I read this stuff and I'm still a little confused. So on the transit priority corridors versus the frequent buses, so are the buses more frequent on a frequent bus route than on a transit priority corridor?
Okay, good question. So we're assuming the frequencies would be the same.
Okay, so the difference is infrastructure.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to clarify anything. And so then the access-focused services would be things that connect people to this core transit network. And so those can include microtransit and feeders, and that could be autonomous or not. Could include active transportation and micromobility. Each of the access zones would be anchored by a mobility hub that would bring all of these services together at one central location that could have other sorts of amenities as well. We're also thinking of the ATN service as part of these access-focused services. We're not actually recommending anything as part of the study for the ATN network. We're just sort of assuming that that's will be part of the access-focused services where relevant. But we're not adding any recommendations for that.
All right, so we wanted to share with you the feedback that we've received to date. We've been meeting with the transit general managers on a monthly basis to bring the different elements of the ITP to them. So we really have co-created a lot of the TPC network with them. We're finding support for bus lane segments that we also understand that we need further study and much more details that come from that. And we also have discussed that the frequency will need to vary and require additional funding to support additional operating funds for this new level of frequent service, especially in counties that have higher frequencies right now. Additionally, we took this to the CCTA board for their retreat. The feedback we received from them was a desire to show all existing frequent bus service in the county to understand the difference between frequent bus service, the TPCs, feeder bus service, the difference between all of these different elements of the transit system on one map as a kind of more layered approach, which we'll be working on. Also, a lot of conversation around the new state laws triggering, around housing, triggering potential, if you make improvements to transit, that it could trigger more housing requirements. Those are specifically around if you are doing full BRT in proposed legislation, it could trigger additional housing density for cities. So we understand that concern. The support is general for TPCs as long as they involved a close collaboration with the cities, which we recognize, of course, there's so much that needs to be worked out in terms of the treatments and the costs and the understanding of these unique situations happening in each city. In general, we saw really strong support for mobility hubs, especially if private funding can be leveraged, which we hope within our federal grant that we can look into different scenarios for that. But we clearly need more public education around what is a mobility hub. We still have a lot of misunderstandings over what that even means. And so we've been working significantly on graphics and video representation so that we can hopefully, as we do engagement around the CTP as well, we can get a better understanding of what that means. So we've met with now all of the RTPCs. The only meeting we have left is the Transpac board. We did the Transpac TAC this morning. So we've met with all the RTPCs and gathered feedback from all of the cities, the transit agencies, again. Areas, we talked about areas that are not identified for transit priority corridors, but still needing focus and additional transit services. We talked again about frequency of services, additional investment needing for infrastructure and operating needs. We talked about support for microtransit and mobility hubs, and again, just identifying further funding for the transit operators. We talked about dedicated lanes and other similar treatments that can be difficult to introduce in particularly congested arterials. Some, even if we had time of day, the concern that there's already bad enough congestion in certain corridors that are defined as TPCs, what it would mean in terms of taking a lane for transit, and how would we make sure that people are encouraged to ride transit to reduce congestion and make it appealing enough to make that switch. And we talked about the skepticism of transit attracting those new large volumes of riders and understanding that. We also got feedback around bike infrastructure and just wanting to make sure that connected last mile bike infrastructure was coordinated along the corridors and that we weren't being forced to make a choice between transit and biking, that they were complementary of each other, and that the mobility hubs served as a connection point between transit and last mile connectivity.
Good afternoon. Adam Dankberg with Kimley Horn, part of the consultant team working on this project, and I'll be talking about the transit priority corridors. All right. Some of you have seen these slides even just a couple hours ago, so thanks for bearing with me. So this slide highlights on the left side some of the goals of the transit priority corridors within the regional network and the overall plan. So one, of course, is to connect people to jobs and destinations with transit. And to achieve that, the idea would be to improve transit travel times and transit effectiveness in order to increase transit ridership. The transit priority corridors do align with regional priorities and other studies, such as work being done by MTC as part of Transit 2050 Plus, and done in previous studies in various RPTCs and other jurisdictions around the county. There's also opportunity for the TPCs to better serve the equity priority communities, as well as serve locations that have economic development opportunities. On the right, we do want to note that the list of where we identified transit lane segments or space dedicated for transit is a little bit more specific than those general goals. We'll touch on some of these criteria later, but they're really focused on where does a transit lane make the most sense and provide the most value. So for the transit priority corridors, it is assumed that the full length of all these corridors have this basic set of improvements. There's a certain standard that goes along with the transit priority corridors. So this includes frequent service, so at least 15 to 20 minutes. Some of them might be more frequent than that. Really nice stops that often are in-lane stops with bus bulbs or transit islands, nice shelters, benches, wayfinding, real-time information, that sort of thing. All the signals along the corridors would have transit signal priority, so upgrades there. There would be a distinctive branding for the transit priority corridors, and they would be accompanied by active transportation improvements, both along the corridor as well as on connecting streets to improve accessibility of the stations. So that is sort of an underlying assumption across all of the TPCs. So then in some locations on the TPCs, many locations on the TPCs, we are identifying additional physical priority improvements as well. That would be dedicated space for transit. And so they generally fall into these four categories. Arterial transit lanes are dedicated bus lanes. There's the image in the top left of Van Ness. where there's dedicated space on the roadway for transit. In the bottom left, part-time transit lanes, these are on highways, is where we're thinking about here. And this would be generally the shoulder, where certain times of the day the bus could use the shoulder. Bottom right is, or middle bottom, would be the express lanes, where buses would use the express lanes. And then the top right would be limited locations at intersections where buses would get queue jumps to bypass queues. A little more context on some of these definitions here. At this point, we are not defining what the geometry or even the general configuration of these arterial transit lanes would be. Could be center running, could be side running, could be certain times of day, could be all day. We aren't really saying what exactly it would need to be. That would need to come with a lot further study, traffic analysis, concept design, things of that nature. But the idea would be to provide dedicated space when needed for transit. As I mentioned, the part-time transit lanes, that definition, we're talking about the highway network. When speeds drop below 30, 35 miles an hour, then the bus could use the existing shoulder or an upgraded shoulder to bypass that congestion only during that times. And then the final one in the lower right would be buses using those express lanes that exist or are being added to the county. So in terms of where we are proposing transit lanes with our initial recommendations, one of the things I really want to highlight is that we need to make some initial assumptions so that we can do some costing, so that we can do evaluation of these corridors to then define some tiering, hierarchy, and future next steps. But the study doesn't have the capacity to go in depth that is really needed on a block by block basis to figure out, where is there space in the roadway? Is it converting a lane? Is it widening? Is it taking the median? Is it getting rid of parking? How are we actually fitting this in? So we have some initial assumptions, but those would certainly be refined over, probably many times over the course of detailed study should those corridors advance. So at this point in time, we had a few filters to identify pretty conservatively in terms of where transit lanes may be possible. And so we're referring to them as candidates for transit lanes. So for those criteria that we looked at for that filtering, we looked at where congestion exists today. Obviously, if there's congestion today, the bus is being stuck in, transit lanes would have the best potential to improve transit speed. Where service is frequent, we want the lanes to be used a lot. Obviously, all the TPCs are frequent, but we really want to look for where there's additional service to make it very frequent. Where there's high ridership today, or where we think there could be high ridership in the future based on some of the modeling that we did in Task 1, and then also consistency with previous planning work. We aren't proposing any transit lanes where roadways are only one lane today, or where segments are short or discontinuous, and where it wouldn't really make sense from a quarter-wide standpoint. And then I'll come back to it again, emphasizing this is really a high-level planning assessment. We haven't done the technical study necessary to really refine these recommendations. So this shows the countywide map. As we presented each of the RPTCs, we went corridor by corridor. I'm not going to do that again today. I think many of you have seen that. It's 9 corridors, so we're going to just kind of look at it at a high level here. This map shows the 9 TPCs spread throughout the county. Where you see the colored lines, either dotted or solid, is where we have transit lanes proposed. So either arterial transit lanes, part-time transit lanes, or the express lane running segments. Where you just see the yellow, that means it's a part of a TPC, but there's not a transit lane proposed in that segment because it didn't meet that filtering criteria. And then I'll hand it over to Kate for the next section.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Okay, so building on what you see here, which is the transit priority corridor network and the frequent bus network, we just wanted to give you a sense of how our recommendations are layered on top of each other. So along the TPC and frequent bus network is the proposed network of mobility hubs. And so we have kind of 3 levels of mobility hubs shown here, and we'll get into that in the following slides, depending on what kinds of services and amenities and what kinds of things they're connecting. And then the access improvement zones provide that first last mile access to the core transit network and are anchored. Each access improvement zone is anchored by a mobility hub. I just want to give you a sense of how this kind of knits the system together in terms of our recommendations. So in terms of mobility hubs, as I said, there are different levels of mobility hubs. And this typology aligns with the Innovate 680 study. It also aligns with the MTC Mobility Hub Playbook. And the most significant hubs would be regional transfer hubs. And so these would serve as access points to high-capacity transit and rail services, so BART stations, Amtrak stations. And these would have the most amenities and the most types of first, last mile services. Regional access hubs would be not completely dissimilar, but they serve as access points for the transit priority corridors and the frequent bus services. And they may have a very similar mix of first, last mile and amenities, but maybe not quite as robust. And then there are a proposed network of community hubs, and so these would be proposed at other locations that aren't TPCs or frequent bus network, but places where it could make sense to gather folks to access the bus network. And so we can also, flip back to any of these maps if folks want to discuss any of that in detail. But just to kind of round out the presentation, we mentioned all the input that we've gotten from all of the RTPCs, and that we are currently working on policy proposals that would help support the action plan and make it effective. And then we are going to be wrapping up the recommendations for this study by the end of the calendar year. But we'll be back to this group to discuss policy recommendations and the costing and evaluation work. So with that, happy to answer any questions that folks have.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the committee? I have one just clarification. I didn't hear your name just for the recording.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm Kate Sargent. I'm with TY Lin, and I'm the consultant project manager.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, do we have any comments from the committee at this time? Member Stamps, looks like he's first.
Just a quick question. Is the one future mobility hub on here Buchanan Field?
Yes.
Interesting.
And as a, a potential, for future services, could be urban air mobility, could be other things. There's also another future mobility hub at the Concord Naval Weapons Station. Like, should that be built out in the future?
Thank you.
Yep.
Guys, a follow-up question.
Yeah, Member Smith, go ahead.
Just to confirm, there's no future mobility hub for Byron Airport. It's hidden under the legend, so I just want to confirm that.
Oh, yeah, there should be.
So that's that
Oh, yeah,
presumably.
you're right. The legend is covering it, but.
So presumably that's then for the, was it automated, the flying helicopter, or the
Yeah,
flying taxi
Taxi,
thing?
yeah.
yeah, right. That's a good catch. We'll just make sure that the legend doesn't cover that. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I have a question for the group. I mean, did some of the questions we had from the previous presentation get answered today, or do you want to ask them again?
I have some different questions, maybe based on the new information.
Oh, go ahead.
Just to identify myself, this is Member Greenblatt. Because I was listening online before I came, so I know that's handy. So I have a number of different questions, and I was trying to give my fellow transit people an opportunity to ask theirs first, but do you guys want to go first?
Member Wertz, go for it. Westcat.
Yes, this is Member Wertz representing Westcat. Just a couple of things that I wanted to ask some clarifying questions and or potentially push back on. One was if we go back to well, they're both from the introduction actually. One is going back to the category of microtransit and feeders being lumped together.
Mm-hmm, okay.
Yeah, can we go back to the slide for that?
Yeah. Be there in 1 sec. There,
Yeah,
this one?
this slide.
Mhm.
I was just sort of wondering if you could talk about why it's phrased like that and framed like that, as like microtransit and then feeders almost sounds like an afterthought, and then the photo appears to be of what looks like microtransit, so.
Yeah, sure. Happy to answer that. So in our recommendations, they are two distinct things. For this slide, we just have them grouped together. But we do have on our individual slides showing the more detailed versions of the recommendations, there are areas where we're recommending feeder bus specifically and areas separately where we're recommending microtransit. Because because they kind of serve different purposes.
Okay,
Yeah.
I appreciate that
Yeah.
clarification. I was worried that we were sort of giving people the impression that they're interchangeable, or that they're,
Right,
you know.
yeah. But, yeah, so the way we're thinking about it, which you can let me know if this is consistent with how you think about it, is that feeder bus services would be more appropriate where the demand would likely to access, like as a first last mile option, would be more along a certain linear path or corridor, and if it's more sort of radial around the station in a more distributed fashion, that something like microtransit could be more appropriate.
I think that's a more fair way of putting it.
Okay.
Can I ask
Member Smith?
a clarifying question on that? Is the feeder route, or, oh, I'm sorry, you're on-
County Connection, by
Yeah,
the
I'm
way.
sorry, Andy Smith County Connection. Yeah, actually, your slide already, I was gonna ask, is feeder routes, do you intend to be that or that to be fixed route? But I see, that's
Yeah,
actually the
fixed
very
route.
first two words on
Yep.
the, under that bubble there. Never mind.
Yes, so thank you for
Member Wertz again.
Yes, Member Wertz again. Thank you for clarifying that question. And then the other question / pushback I had was going back to sort of the list of concerns that folks had raised at earlier stages of this process. There was something about, I think there was a quote along the lines of skepticism that transit can attract large volumes of riders. I was a little bit curious about where that came from, and I did just want to mention that in WestCat's monthly report on ridership from May of this year, we saw a 31.8% year-over-year increase in average weekday passengers on our Lynx bus service to San Francisco. So I know that's just one data point anecdote, but I do wonder if there are folks who are not transit riders themselves who are perhaps missing the momentum that transit ridership is continuing to build as we bounce back from the COVID lockdowns.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that very well could be that folks are not really aware of that, and so we can definitely try to make that point in our materials. So, good, yeah.
Thank you so much.
I think this was specifically East County, some of the cities, and so this is where we recognize that we need to do some more visual representations of the different types of transit improvements to show how it can be appealing and a good choice for folks that are not traditionally attracted to it.
Totally. Thank you so much. I appreciate the clarification.
Yeah.
Are there any other transit reps who want to speak? Member Conradi?
Sure, if you go back to the action.
AC Transit.
The graphic, yes. Right at the
This one?
beginning. So the access-focused services, they really seem to me not as strategies, but conducive to pilots. They don't seem to be globally applicable to the county, but you could have successful demonstration projects here and there.
Well, I guess maybe we could be specific if you don't
Well,
mind. Yeah.
For example, the feeder question, so we design our service, we serve every BART station that's in our service area for AC Transit.
Yeah.
But we don't provide any feeder service, but we serve all those stations because it's just not cost effective to just go back and forth to a BART station. We try to serve as many destinations as we can, given limited resources. So that's our strategy, and I don't think we would embrace the model of a feeder where you're taking people from a housing development to a BART station as a sustainable model.
Yeah.
So trying to do more things with limited resources is our adaptive strategy to budget constraints. So I don't think we can do it, like increase feeder routes. In terms of the skepticism, I think there's skepticism about buses in particular being able to draw lots of people. I think it's a warranted skepticism, but really the three things that contribute to the quality of service that makes it attractive to existing riders, to retain them as riders, and to attract people who may not be riders today, it's really frequency is number one.
Yeah.
Speed, travel time is number two, and reliability is sort of third, especially in the age of having real-time apps. In the age of paper schedules, reliability was probably number one. But now it's really that's sort of taken care of through the technology. And it's frequency, which can only be taken care of through money and investment. You know, any regional travel model, when you create your transit network, it's that wait time that kills you. So that's what, you know, like late night, you know, coming back from San Francisco, it's like, wow, it's 20 minutes between buses. That's terrible.
Yeah.
Take an Uber. But, you know, during the day, it's good frequency, and would never, you know, personally, I would never consider taking an Uber during
Yeah.
the middle of the day. So
Yeah.
I think that's the challenge, and then connecting your investments to create travel time savings to allow the frequency to be improved, I think is really the synergy that you're trying to get at.
Yeah, absolutely.
With it. I have skepticism about the mobility hubs because I think they're great for BART stations in particular, fantastic. But I don't think they have a life outside of BART stations. I don't think they're going to be successful. I mean, what we're seeing is that there's less and less of the rental bikes, rental scooters, and there's more ownership of people using their own bikes or purchasing electric scooters and then
Yeah.
carrying them on the bus or carrying them onto the BART trains.
Yeah, yeah. So we kind of are thinking about the mobility hubs as a menu of possibilities, really. And so we'd have to get specific about what is realistic and applicable to each thing. So yeah, for sure, bike share is not going to be applicable everywhere in the county, or, you know, I don't, maybe a lot of places we'll have to figure that out. But there are going to be ways that people access these services one way or another in terms of first, last mile, and we want those to be not cars, right? And we want to expand the reach of that network. So what are those, you know? And it could be personal devices, and we could provide secure parking or ways for them, people, you know, people can bring bikes on the bus now. But anyway, well, it's sort of a menu of things that'll have to be tailored to each specific location for sure. And those first, last mile services could be, you know, minimal in some places or maximal in other places. Yeah, but good. Thank you for the feedback.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Member Smith.
Yeah, I'll since we're, you know, transit operators, I'll to kind of build upon the comments regarding mobility hubs. You know, the BART stations, you know, as Jim said, the BART stations are kind of the obvious. We actually do have a couple of additional transit centers that, you know, we do see a fair bit of connectivity going on. DVC Transit Center, San Ramon Transit Center, Amtrak Station in Martinez. But, you know, it's really those areas where you have a lot of fixed route service of one form or the other coming together, I think, where those are perhaps most beneficial. Something that's kind of an additional matter for us, and this really builds upon what Jim was talking about with frequency. And by the way, I would love it if we could get every 20-minute frequency, even in the middle of the day, out our way. You know, if we, and this really just has to do with, you know, how we invest. You know, the mobility hubs, there's a fairly high price tag associated with them. And you could have the best darn bus stop in the world, but if the bus only comes once an hour, nobody's going to ride it. And so, you know, that really, again, it speaks to that frequency issue. And so, you know, of course, we're talking about operational costs versus capital costs, but, you know, really, you know, we really would want to see the investment in the operations to be able to support the capital investment of the mobility hubs. And there's really not much of a point of doing that capital investment without the operational investment.
Yeah, thank you for the emphasis. Yeah, I mean, the frequencies that we're proposing here would be a big lift from where we are now. Like it's definitely would require a big investment to get there. So, like, definitely acknowledged.
Okay, any other transit? Oh, Member Elias.
Not quite transit, but it's related to the question of East County in terms of their question of whether we're shifting enough people over. From our point of view, I'm with City of Concord, we're trying to allocate our space in the roadway. So if we're talking about losing a travel lane in the AM or the PM peak, then we better be talking about buses that can move 800 or 900 people. That's probably what you're getting out of a travel lane on Ignacio Valley or Clayton. So that's kind of the trade-off where is if we do this, we lose a lane and the bus is only going to pick up another 100 people an hour, then we're really losing capacity here and we're not moving people. So it's just something to be thinking about. You know, if we can show a mode shift that moves everybody over to 800 or 900, then the city might consider it. But until we start seeing what the benefits are totally, then it would be hard for the city to consider removing a travel lane to accommodate more frequent bus service unless we can show that we're actually getting the ridership to justify it, or at least somewhat
Yeah.
close.
Absolutely. And that's a good segue just to make sure folks are kind of aware of where we're going as a next step too, because we are going to be doing some evaluation of each individual transit priority corridor and for the mobility hubs as a network too, to demonstrate what's the cost benefit associated with each of these in terms of ridership, travel time savings, et cetera. And so we'll be able to see, you know, which of these are potentially investments that make more sense. And we'll be able to sort of group them into like the most effective and maybe for later types of investments.
I guess the concern I have from the presentation earlier, it doesn't sound like you're looking at the effects on operations of vehicles, which I think that's a very large part of the benefit cost
Well, I'll let you
associated
speak
with
to
it.
that within the context of what we can do for this study anyway.
Yeah, and we discussed this earlier today. Yeah, so understand the comment that was raised earlier today to look at V over C or some other standard to just identify some of those trade-offs. So that's something we'll talk about.
Yeah, okay. Just nice to show the buses save 20 minutes, but if the cars are having another 40 minutes of travel time.
Yeah, right.
Overall delay, you know, for the 3,000 people that took bus, they saved 20 minutes, but the 5,000 people who took a car who gained 20 minutes, that's a huge imbalance between
for sure
overall travel time.
Yep.
I'd like
Member
to just
Greenblatt?
comment on that. I think that's very interesting, and it's called an integrated transit plan or whatever. And so maybe what we also need to think about are the incentives that we could be providing to get people to make those shifts. Because, you know, I'm thinking about these transit corridors, and I'm sorry, there's so many new names here, I'm not quite remembering them right, but if we're building, you know, a transit corridor, and then there's new development in the area, somebody said that this one slide looks like a bunch of future projects, or, you know, could we include a future project where new development along the corridor gives residents transit passes? So we're incentivizing that shift. And to me, that helps make this integrated.
Yeah.
You know, it's holistic. And I think we're not seeing those incentives that might shift people in here yet.
In terms of transportation demand management strategies. Yeah, so we'll note that specific suggestion down as we get into the policy proposals that will kind of support this work. That's like an example of one that could be kind of a supporting recommendation. So yeah, we'll take that down. Thanks.
Did you have an additional comment, Member Greenblatt? Go ahead.
I have a variety of them. So
yeah, great.
Some I'll say, some I'll wait for you to give me feedback on, and then I'll go on to the next one. First off, I want to say, you know, we're the technical coordinating committee, so we should be going into a lot of detail on this. And I think that we're not receiving that level of detail here. I'm just going to compare it to the prior presentation where we had a written document that let us really look at what was being proposed. And in this case, we would have, if we had something like that to supplement this presentation, maybe we would have understood that microtransit and feeders was something different. So I guess like in the future, I'd like more detail than just the summary presentation. When you come back, and I look forward to you guys coming back. So my first comment has to do with the feedback received from the RTPCs, and that wasn't really clear to me how, like, could you differentiate between the RTPCs, the elected officials, and the RTPC tax? And like, which of these comments you might have heard multiple times and those that might have been one-offs? That would be helpful. Do you want to take that? And again, like, this could have been a great summary in our given to us in the staff report.
This is still a work in progress. We're still going to the RTPC.
Totally
so
get it.
that's partially the challenge with this. We still have one meeting left to get through. I will say from the electeds, a lot of the feedback we were getting was around wanting to see more graphical representation of the layering of a high-frequency network with the bus feeder network, with the TPC network. So a lot of the visual requests came from the electeds, and that's kind of like that first piece. Frequency was more from the cities or from transit operators. Challenges around meeting frequencies without additional operating support. In general, I would say the support for microtransit mobility hubs was pretty broad. I already touched on the funding, dedicated lanes. Cities were the comments around dedicated lanes, similar treatments with congested arterials is a consistent feedback we've gotten. Attracting large riders also came from cities and somewhat electeds, I want to say, in the east. And then bike infrastructure was for a member of the public and some cities as well.
So when you're saying cities, you mean the tax, the RTPC tax? Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
Can I add something to that, just since we're talking about that? There's something that didn't make it on this list from SWAT, and specifically it's evacuation concerns. And this is a huge deal for La Marinda and other locations. So I just want to get that on the list because we definitely said it.
Yeah, I guess in my mind, that goes in the evacuation study. So that's included in the infrastructure piece of the evacuation study, and we reflected that in that.
So you're referencing that, and then it'll be talked about in that study?
Yeah.
Okay, you comfortable with that, Nate?
Yeah, that works. I think maybe to add, though, from SWAT, one of the other comments made, and I know it goes a little bit potentially off in a different route, is, without kind of bringing everything back into review, the way that the corridors are being defined about, having to have the dedicated transit lanes or having these, the ability to support infrastructure, that all makes sense. But then it means that we're not able to actually prioritize transit on certain roadways in certain areas that, at least from a local agency standpoint, would be priority. And I'm sure from an operator standpoint, probably are priorities too. Mm-hmm. So I get it, as defined, it doesn't quite fit, but then I would encourage, and again, this is what I think the electeds at SWAT kind of echoed as well, is that perhaps there's value in broadening that perspective, so that way all local agencies are heard and felt, valued and identified here.
Yeah, the TPCs are really supposed to be the long corridor cross-county movements, which is why we want to do that layering of, it's not that they're not high frequency and that they're not priority, it's just that these are the cross-regional priority corridors with the highest ridership.
Did you want to add anything on behalf of SWAT this time?
Yeah, again, I agree and understand with that. We would want to see an opportunity to identify other options, essentially, just because, I'll use an example. When we are looking for local funding through grant efforts and so forth, and we're trying to leverage something we can do, if we don't have consistency with some of these countywide and regional plans, it limits our ability. So I get it. It doesn't fit into this overall network, and that's perfectly fine. But then in some ways, we're not getting the tools we need to help be competitive in some grant applications. So I think there's value for everybody there.
Yeah, and hopefully, our intention is that the ITP also feeds into the CTP, which is ultimately what is developing project lists that sets the project list for the county.
Okay, thanks, Nate. And then Member Greenblatt, let's go on to the next question.
So it's kind of to wrap this one up. I'm assuming there's a report or some document that's going to, say, you received these comments from the RTPCs and the RTPC tax, and this is how you've responded.
Yeah.
So the next iteration of things, we'll see something like that.
Yeah, we can address how we incorporate your feedback for sure.
What is the final, or like, what document are we headed towards? Because we haven't seen a nice meaty thing to read.
Yeah, so,
Go to sleep over.
so there's an action plan document that is still going through review, currently. And then there will be, a separate policy deliverable, a separate evaluation, and cost estimating deliverable, and all of those will be wrapped into the final report. So, there's a market assessment document that has been completed, that doesn't have any of these recommendations. It just documents like existing transit service and, latent demand and a number of other things. But all of that gets wrapped into the final report. So that's the status of the deliverables.
And we'll look at a drafts of these before it becomes final and it's too late.
We'll be back through, so we're going to be doing more detailed work, looking more at the corridors, and coming back to the RTPCs and then to the TCC before, the report is finalized. So there'll be a whole other round of feedback.
Cool, thanks. So then, this, I'm switching subjects now. This 15 to 20 minute headway issue and that qualifying frequency would allow you to be categorized as a transit priority corridor. And I really think that there should be like a subset of transit priority corridors, because we have currently frequencies, maybe not in some parts of the county, but higher frequencies in other parts of the counties that, if you had 15 to 20 minute corridor headways, people would be extremely frustrated.
Right.
And so I'm wondering if within transit priority corridors, we could have and the transit providers could say that range, but I'm just going to make up 5 to 10 minute headways and 10 to 20 minute headways. And then because I think the service is so different, and what you can provide people is so different between those types of transits, types of transit. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, for sure. And we have had this conversation actually. So that would be kind of like the floor, the 15 to 20 minutes.
I get that, but but a floor doesn't help. I just don't think that there's enough differentiation, because there's such a difference between a 20-minute headway and a 5-minute headway, and the types of services that you provide people and what an agency could even really support. Which kind of comes up to my next question or comment is, if we have what I'm going to call infrequent transit service at 15 to 20 minute headways, because in West County that's really would be insufficient. Who and where is the money coming from to develop and maintain these in various other in these hubs? And we're barely able to maintain bus stops now. So if a mobility hub at a 15 to 20 minute headway seems like a big lift, which I want to be ambitious and do that, but where are we talking about how to get from where we are today, where we're struggling to get bus stops maintained, to developing the hub?
Yeah, for sure. And maybe you want to,
Particularly for the hubs, the reason we got the federal grant is to look at alternative financing for mobility hubs. Is there some kind of a relationship we can have with a developer who is willing to own and maintain the hubs, if there are enough services at the hubs? And this is, thinking of mobility hubs beyond just this transportation connection piece. It's about trip reduction. So what other amenities can be there to reduce trips? Can it be package delivery systems? Can it be dry cleaning? Can it be other commercial services that can generate income to then support mobility hubs that then puts into the O&M costs of that? And then again, this whole thing is very aspirational. So we are trying to look at how big can we imagine this, and knowing that we have to make difficult decisions and what is going to potentially inform a future measure as well.
Yeah, I'm not seeing enough support for the, I'll call it the 5 to 10 minute headway service providers that, you know, I don't know if they're ready to support, and I shouldn't judge for them, maybe they are, but some of these things, it's just like, you know, let's try to get them maintaining the existing service that they have. And what I'm concerned about is that, you know, new and shiny things get funded, and, you know, a new mobility hub might get funded before, you know, let's get the bus stop working properly, and, you know, the electronic signs functioning kind of thing. So I think that's a big challenge that I'd like to see addressed further here.
I mean, I think we see it as both. We're doing a lot to fight for existing transit funding right now, and hopefully with future regional measure and anything else that comes out to support future funding, we hope that it's a both.
But I guess I don't see it in the document or the PowerPoint presentation, because there's not a document yet.
Yeah, we haven't gotten to the funding and implementation piece yet, for sure. That will have a section in the final report. But the general idea of this project is that we start with what is the vision for transit in the county? How do we have an aspirational vision for transit? Can we agree on what that looks like? And then and then evaluate, like, what are going to be the most effective pieces of this? How much is it going to cost? And then that kind of, how do we pay for it, is like the after that piece.
Yeah. I guess I'm still going to weigh in and say I'd like to see it some clearer hierarchy between the 10 to 20 minute headway aspirations and the 5 to 10 minute.
I hear you. I just don't know if we have enough information to get to that level of planning, because that's kind of something that would have to be done in conjunction with each of the transit operators in terms of the demand they see on their specific routes. So I'm not sure if we have the level of specificity as part of this vision document to go in and say 5, 10, 15, like on each of these corridors.
Just add that in our conversations with the general managers, we also, on the other side of this, have providers who frequent for them is 45 to 60 minutes.
Right. Yeah. No,
So
I get that. So I think that
different.
there's a big difference, but within transit priority corridors, there's a wide array that's being considered here, and I'd like to see it, you know, divided up a little bit more.
Okay, we'll definitely take that feedback back and see if we can, what we can do there. I think in terms of the communication piece, what we wanted to also just communicate is, like, this is the network of, like, if you're a transit customer, you can kind of like show up and go is kind of what the CTP effort is calling it, but like the network where you can kind of show up and, you know, you can get from one place to the other without having to like consult detailed schedules. So, you know, that could be, you know, obviously different in different parts of the network in terms of exactly how frequent, but, and we'll take a look at whether we can get a bit more specific, but that's what we were hoping to communicate sort of overall, I guess. If that makes sense.
Okay, and, yeah. Are you comfortable with that, or okay for now?
Yeah, we'll see. We'll take that feedback. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And did you have any further questions to raise at this time, or and anybody else on the committee you'd like to say something briefly? Oh yeah, Member Elias.
Just one feedback, when we're talking about the lanes in terms of removing them, let's try to keep it not, I think you're calling it proposed. Let's
Potential.
consider
Yeah, potential.
something that's nowhere near, this is what we want to do, this is just, we're still considering it.
Yeah. I mean, we call them potential. What do you think about that? Or candidate for transit lanes.
Well, but we have like proposed
Oh,
improvements.
so, okay,
right?
thank you
So
for
there's a bit
clarifying.
of a,
So anywhere that there's already an existing planning study that has recommended specific things, that is shown as more definitive. But anything that doesn't already, like San Pablo already has, you know, specific recommendations. For example, 680 already has specific recommendations. So, but other than that, like, you're just seeing sort of candidates outside of anything that's more definitive like that.
it's just when I look at it, and maybe there's, I don't know how to fix it, but I see the dash and I see that as being proposed improvement. And then I immediately go to what's the proposed improvement? It's a transit lane. based on the color scheme. So I don't necessarily see
okay.
the candidate transit
Yeah,
lane.
yeah, yeah.
It's, I just want to be
yeah,
specific
I see your
that
confusion.
these are,
Yeah, I see your
consider
confusion.
doing
Okay.
a lane, a transit-only lane.
Got it. Okay, we'll try to make that clearer, yeah.
Okay, Member Greenblatt?
That just reminded me. So the next time you guys come back, I'd like to have these maps. I know that there's more focused maps by each RTPC, but can you include those so we can do our nitty-gritty research? And then also be sure that they're, even like at this scale, I'd like to see the street names or something, so it's not such a vague blob. Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, we can follow up with some more detailed.
Yeah. I know when you came to WCTAC, you had more specific
Yeah,
ones, but.
we do have them, yeah. Mhm. Yeah,
But in labeling the streets is key.
sure.
Thanks.
Okay, any other questions or, looks like Member Smith? Oh, Member Conradi.
Okay, I can, so just to clarify, so a part-time transit lane is only on freeways, not on arterial streets?
Adam, do you want to weigh in on that?
So there's, an arterial transit lane can be part-time, but just for the purpose of this definition, when we talk about part-time transit lanes, we're talking about on the highway, the freeway network. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Member Smith?
Actually, now I do have a question. Is that bus on shoulder?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so it's not a question, not even a comment on this, is more just like a heads up to avoid potential future pitfalls. Actually, Danielle, you'd mentioned in the presentation, I forget the bill number, but the housing law where you're keeping tabs on, hey, if we increase frequency of service, there's implications zoning-wise that the cities could be like, oh, you didn't do this, of course. No jazz hands. I just wanted to give you a heads up. This is actually not Andy Smith, transit operator, but Andy Smith, former city planner. State housing laws, oh my God. So glad I don't have to deal with them anymore. But just to give you a heads up, for once you go beyond, if you have a bus stop that has two intersecting routes, each of which has headways of no longer than 20 minutes during peak periods, that is then a major transit stop, and within a half mile of that, cities cannot impose parking requirements, which I think is great, both personally and professionally, but there's political implications to that, so just something to be aware of. And under the existing density bonus laws, which a lot of housing nowadays take advantage of, because basically if you provide, honestly, a relatively little amount of affordable housing, and it may even be just the amount that the city requires you to provide anyway, you can kind of throw out a lot of the zoning requirements, setbacks and things of that nature. You get increased density, increased height, and if you're doing a density bonus project that's within a half mile of one of these major transit stops, you get way more height and I think unlimited density. So this is just, I just wanted to give you a heads up, because at some point you might have a city that kind of, a light bulb goes on in their head and they, it's like, oh my God. So
Yeah, we
just
heard
to be prepared for that.
a lot of opinions about that at the board workshop, yep.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to avoid a future headache for you. That's
for
all.
that.
But thank you.
All right. Thank you for answering all our questions. Are there more questions that we would like answered or comments at this time? All right, so this is not an action item, so won't vote, but thank you very much for the presentation, everyone, and appreciate hearing from you in the process, and look forward to another presentation in the future.
Okay, thanks
Thank
for
you.
your time, thanks for your input.
Okay, so we changed the order of the agenda a little bit, so we're going to move back to what was formerly item 1, but is now, I guess technically was item 3, and now is going to be the last item, which is the election of chair and vice chair. And we have consent calendar to approve. Maybe we should do that first. Would you prefer to do that first? Consent calendar?
Yeah, whichever order you'd like to do, yeah.
Okay, well, let's just get the consent calendar done.
Are you entertaining a motion?
I am entertaining a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
Okay, Member Smith,
Second.
Second by Member Wertz. That was easy. Thank you, guys. Approved. Do we need to do a vote on this one, or yes?
Yes.
So let's do a roll call vote, please.
Member Armijo,
Yes.
Member Chen,
Yes.
Member Conradi,
Yes.
Member Elias,
Yes.
Member LaBelle,
Yes.
Member Levine,
Yes.
Member Panganiban,
Yes.
Member Smith,
Yes.
Member Stamps.
Yes.
Sorry, Member Greenblatt, sorry.
Yes.
Member Wertz
Yes.
and Chair Weeks.
Yes.
We have, that passes with members Diaz, Doe, Golier, Nelson, Ortiz, Redmond, Rahani, Valeris, and Pillai absent.
Okay, thank you.
Through the chair, if I may, I just want to thank
Smith.
2CTA staff for your work with regarding the, I want to call them minutes, but the SOA, what does that stand for? For the January meeting. I know I and a couple others were being sticklers, and then I got confused even and got upset because of my confusion. And so I certainly apologize for that, but want to thank you for working on that and getting in front of us. That was why I wanted to make the first motion.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. All right, that leaves the last item on our agenda, which is the election of chair and vice chair. And do we need to do public comment on this before we move forward with it?
Yes.
Have we received any
We
public
have
comment
not.
on this item?
And we have not received any public comment, remote or in person.
All right, great. Well, up our chair and vice chair. So Member Pillai is vice chair. She's not here today. I'm the chair, and it's time to rotate the chair. And we have several people who could take over the chair and vice chair positions. It would be nice to do it in one motion if people have in mind people they'd like to recommend for these two positions, and then we could take a vote and do them both. Or if it's clear on one and not the other, we can do them one at a time and then see what we can do about the second. So I guess I'll just start with seeing if we have any nominations for chair.
Do we know if Vice Chair Pillai wants to be nominated?
Well, since she's not here, we'll assume that she does.
Okay.
But I don't know how to answer that. Let me find
I'll
out.
nominate her.
Okay, and it was assumed that vice chair would move to chair probably. So thank you for the nomination. Do we have a second?
I'll
Oh,
second
can
that.
we do public comment first?
Okay. Hold on, everyone.
Sorry,
We'll be
I'm
right with
new.
you.
Bear with me.
So you can go ahead and do all in one, chair and vice chair together, or are you just planning to do them separately?
I'd like to do them all together if we can get agreement on who will be in each position, and then we'll just do one vote on both of them at the same time.
Oh, okay.
But I was just starting out with chair, and then it sounds like we have a good nomination for that and a second. And then.
So you could actually do one motion, so have
Oh,
a
okay.
discussion over chair, have a discussion of vice chair, and then one motion for both.
Gotcha. Okay, so stepping back, thank you for the motions, but we need to do vice chair first, so hold those motions. And then someone will second that motion, yeah. Okay, so do we have anybody who would be interested in nominating someone for vice chair? We have several members of WICTAC who could do a great job, and if anybody'd like to step forward and nominate someone at this time, it'd be great to hear that. Member Armijo.
I will nominate Ms. Greenblatt for the vice chair.
Do we have a second of that?
I second that motion.
Do we know if Member Greenblatt wants to serve in that position?
If nominated and approved, I will serve. But I just also want to say that the chair usually rotates among the RTPCs, so that's
Yes.
why we're talking about WICTAC at
Yes.
this point.
Yes, that's good for background for anybody who might be listening online. So it's a WICTAC show today. So it sounds like we have two strong candidates and their support, and seemingly. to move forward with a motion to approve. So do we have a motion to approve Member Pillai as the chair and Member Greenblatt as vice chair?
So moved.
Member Smith, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, seconded by Member Chen. And when you finish writing, let's do a roll call vote.
Public comment.
Oh, public comment at this time. Okay, great.
And there are no in-person, remote, or written public comments. Thank you.
Okay, and if you're in the room and want to do it, there's blue cards for you to fill out. And seeing no movements, let's do a roll call vote.
Member Armijo?
Yes.
Member Chen?
Yes.
Member Conradi?
Yes.
Member Elias?
Yes.
Member Member Greenblatt?
Yes.
Member LaBelle?
Yes.
Member Levine?
Yes.
Member Panganiban?
Yes.
Member Smith?
Yes.
Member Stamps?
Yes.
Member Wertz?
Yes.
Chair Weeks?
Yes.
Passes with members Diaz, Doe, Golier, Nelson, Ortiz, Redmond, Rahani, Valeros, and Pillai absent.
Okay, and someone's going to have to tell her she's the chair.
Yeah.
I'm done. So thank you, everyone, for your presentations, and thank you, committee, for letting me serve as your chair. It was the first time I had the chance to do it, and the former chairs in the audience. Andy, thank you from the last time. So learned a lot from him, and learned a lot from this experience. So appreciate it was an honor to serve. So thank you. So that brings us.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Of course.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. So that brings us to close to the end of the agenda. Looks like we have a couple little things here to clean up. Do we have anything from the Citizens Advisory Committee or any member or staff comments at this time? Okay, it looks like no. Okay. And then any correspondence and communications? I don't see any. Anybody want to bring up any future agenda items? Okay, well, we'll discuss those online. And that brings us to adjournment. So this will be my last time of hitting this gavel. So
Before you do that,
Oh,
can
oh,
we
oh, oh.
adjourn in honor of our outgoing chair and recognition of your work and the vice chair prior to that? I assume you were the vice chair prior
Well,
to that, right?
I feel like you guys dealt with me trying to say your names enough times that you guys paid the price in that way, so I appreciate it.
Well, I'd like to put it out there.
Well, thank you.
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate it. And good luck, Member Greenblatt, as vice chair. Thank you.
Good job.
I knew it was coming.
That's good. I'm glad you were, they said they were going to talk to everybody, so hopefully that's how it was supposed to go. So, thank you. See you next time. Yeah, see you. Thanks again. Of course.
Yeah, you did a great job.
I'm just learning, so I'll be good in the future. That you guys dealt with me the first time. That was.
Well, I think it's hard to, like, be able to run the meeting, and then you also have to think about what you want to say and comment on.
Right, and it's not your show.